Welcome to Republican Roundtable. I'm your host, Max Reimer. Today we are talking about transportation, planes, trains, and automobiles. Well, not necessarily planes, but we have a guest in studio today who is a friend of the show, very knowledgeable about transportation issues, the transportation czar, Frank Pafko.
Thank you for having me, Max.
You're also running for State House this time around, 63B again.
Yes, I am. And
Okay.
it is no longer Gene Wagenius. It will be an open seat.
An open seat. So you're saying there's a shot.
I may have a shot.
63B, where is that?
That is eastern part of Richfield and portions of South Minneapolis.
Very good. And we're talking about some issues today, particularly in Minneapolis, where we hear, I feel like, news story after news story, not the least of which is about transportation, but that is a big part of what they are attempting to pursue. They have a number of different initiatives that we're going to talk about today. But overall, Frank, kind of give us the lowdown on what Minneapolis is trying to do and trying to accomplish as it pertains to transportation.
Well, there has been trending over the last several decades a war on cars at all levels of government, federal, state, county, the Met Council. At the local level, and particularly the city of Minneapolis, is taking the lead at implementing very draconian measures to decrease vehicle use in the city of Minneapolis. Their 2040 plan right off sets a goal of a 38% reduction in the vehicle miles traveled in the city of Minneapolis. That's what they want to accomplish. What some of the measures that they are trying to do is, one, they have notoriously always had insufficient off-street parking, so that their residents have to park on the streets, which at this time of the year always means they are very inefficient in the plowing of snow, compared to Richfield, which has adequate off-street parking, and whenever there's a snowfall, 2-inch snowfalls, you get your cars off the street, and within a few hours the next morning, the streets are plowed, and you can get on with your lives. Minneapolis takes 3-4 days.
So the war on cars, that is a very pointed way of putting things. And you said it's from basically every level of government. Philosophically, Frank, what is the mentality behind that? I know that the argument that they make is less wear and tear on the roads. You don't want to focus on repairing the roads. Is there some kind of philosophical driving force behind that?
I think there's two main philosophies. One is the radical environmentalists have said that fossil fuels are evil.
Sure.
And that they are doing everything they can to decrease the use of fossil fuels, to drive up the cost of gasoline, and to get people out of their vehicles and into mass transit. So that is illustrated right now by the opposition to Enbridge Line Free, the previous protest against the Dakota Access Line. Those are ways to get safe, efficient movement of oil from North Dakota and Canada to the refineries in Minnesota. We'll wait and see. That's at the environmentalist level, they're protesting it. At the state level, the Walz administration is slow walking the approval of the Enbridge line. And so they're trying to decrease the use of coal. They're even trying now to decrease the use of natural gas. But primarily, they have tried to reduce oil use, drive up the cost. But in the last decade, technology has won out, and fracking has allowed the United States to become energy independent. And with the Trump administration, has allowed additional oil exploration where it had been restricted in previous administrations. So on the one hand, you've got the environmentalists, which are now a core constituency of the DFL party, are trying to reduce fossil fuel use. Then on the other hand, you have what I would call the socialist wing of the Democratic Party.
I'm guessing there's some crossover between the environmentalists and the socialists.
They are bedfellows and not strange ones with that. Inexpensive gasoline and the personal automobile are the core features of American independence. That ability, especially in the post-World War II era, has given has built the American middle class and given them the ability to live and work wherever they want to travel whenever they want to, and to go wherever they want to. And to people who want more government control on your lives, they want to move you into trains which go from point A to point B at set times of the day and reduce your mobility, reduce your ability to move around, reduce your personal freedom. So you've got restrictions on personal freedom and the war on fossil fuels coming together and is manifesting itself in a war on cars, and the city of Minneapolis is in the lead.
And we'll get into, I think, some of those specific initiatives within that 2040 plan, Frank. But I think before we do, and I want to get your thoughts on this because it provoked a thought in me, this idea of the market will actually provide different solutions specifically for that environmental concern.
Yeah.
Now, and, the market has its flaws in some ways, but at the end of the day, some of these cars retaining your independence are becoming predominantly electric vehicles. It seems to me that they're kind of running out of that environmental justification.
Well, one of the things they're trying to do, however, is to force electric vehicles on the market.
Okay.
Governor Walz has a proposal to adopt the California car standards, and he must adopt them but because of a federal waiver to California, which, by the way, the Trump administration is trying to cancel. Governor Walz is trying to have Minnesota adopt, through rule, not legislation, adopt the California car standards. And that means that a certain percentage of all vehicles sold in the state of Minnesota must be zero emission or electric vehicles.
And you have to get like a certification or a check on your vehicle every now and again.
Not anymore. We used for purposes of air pollution control, we used to have to get an annual emissions check. That was for carbon monoxide and for particulates. We, the metropolitan area, got out of violating air quality standards. It's called a maintenance area. We no longer have to do those checks. The internal combustion engine has been reducing the amount of pollutants, the 7 criteria pollutants that were originally identified in the Clean Air Act of the 1970s, has been reducing that. Things like ozone, nitrous oxide, particulates, carbon monoxide, so that right now, literally the only time an internal combustion engine pollutes those are cold starts, when you're first starting out or until you warm up in the wintertime, which is why air quality tends to be a little worse in winter than in summer. But by mandating electric vehicles,
through rule, not legislation.
You are driving the technology, or you are driving the demand ahead of the technology. We still do not have good battery technology. An electric vehicle in Minnesota, when it's 20 below, has only a fraction of its available power. You know how your battery sounds on a cold start at 30 below?
Yes.
That's what the entire fuel tank on an electric vehicle will sound like when it's trying to drive at 30 below. We still need a revolution in battery technology. I think that's coming, and it will be a good thing when it arrives. But right now, you have questionable range on a fully electric vehicle. They're saying you might have a 200-mile range, which will get you to most places in Minnesota.
Sounds good.
In summertime.
Yeah.
What will it do in wintertime? And then when you get there, how long will you have to have it plugged in?
Right.
Another point that I bring up is revenue to the Highway User Trust Fund, which funds both MnDOT and a portion of city and county state aid roads. The Constitution dedicates any excise tax on a means of propulsion that goes to this fund. So that means your gas tax.
Yep.
Right now, we pay sales tax on electricity. Goes to the general fund. If you're using it And right now, not much is being used to recharge a vehicle. But if
Sure.
we're trying to mandate 25% of the new cars in the state of Minnesota being electric, that's tax revenue going to the general fund, not to the Highway User Trust
Right.
Fund, and that's an unconstitutional diversion away from funds that are used, that are supposed to be used
Right.
to maintain and build roads.
Propelled by an artificial decree that comes from on high, basically.
It has never been a problem. They put the gas tax on. They never figured electricity was going to
Sure.
drive cars. But the legislature is derelict in their duties and needs to rectify that.
So getting back to Minneapolis specifically in this 2040 plan, what are some of the hard deliverables from this plan that they plan on kind of implementing?
Well, obviously reduce parking. Minneapolis is notoriously not mandated off-street parking. And now in their new 2040 plan, are they not only allowing multifamily houses in areas zoned single family,
Yep.
they are reducing, if not eliminating, the requirement for off-street parking. So that increases the density of the neighborhood and puts more vehicles to park on the street. If you can't find a parking place, you can't have your vehicle. Downtown Minneapolis has always provided maybe 50%, 40% of the parking spots for the available jobs. They force people to use transit because you can't get a parking place. Right now, they're going to force you to not own a car because you can't get a parking place. Second, the last legislative session took a long-standing provision in state law, which is any changes to a speed limit has to go through the Commissioner of Transportation before it can be approved. Has to undergo an engineering study,
Sure.
and that notoriously raised the speed limit rather than lower it, which is why you never asked for a speed study. It is now in the province of local government, and the city of Minneapolis has now directed its engineering department to do whatever studies are necessary to reduce the speed limit to 20 or 25 miles an hour.
And I'm sure that engineering department is not politically or philosophically motivated at all.
Well,
right?
the mayor and the city council has directed an outcome of of a yet to be completed engineering study.
Of course.
So, and then they will be reducing the standard 30 mile an hour speed limit to either 20 or 25 miles an hour. That process will be ongoing during 2020. Coupled with that, the city of Minneapolis is seeking a change in state law to allow red light cameras and cameras for speed enforcement. City of Minneapolis, a couple of decades ago, implemented red light cameras to catch people running red lights.
Yep.
That went to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and it was found to be illegal. You cannot write a ticket off of a camera. A police officer has to physically see it. But if they can get a state law change, not only can they put cameras at intersections to see who's running the red light, they want to use it for speed enforcement. So now you're used to 30 miles an hour, you reduce it to 20 miles an hour, you put cameras up there. You don't need a police officer because they want to reduce the numbers of police officers. And they will then turn these cameras into a revenue-generating machine to ticket people going a few miles an hour over a just reduced speed limit.
And to my understanding, and just knowing how Washington, D.C. does it, been out there a couple times, and in the city, they have these legally enforced cameras, and they'll hit you if you are 1 or 2 miles per hour over the speed limit in those cases.
I'm sure.
I would imagine that'd be the same here.
Minneapolis will be is always looking for new sources of revenue.
You mentioned with that one in particular, we'll move on to a couple of the other points, but with that point in particular, I do find it interesting that they are going with this more automated process while also attempting to reduce the number of police officers, either through just not hiring them or through natural attrition because it's such a crappy job in some cases.
Well, it is. And, with the... I don't even want to call them DFLers. They are.
In Minneapolis,
In Minneapolis, they're socialist economy.
Yeah.
They don't call them.
I don't think they would call themselves.
And they want to they want to reduce the police presence, but also because of the crime rate in the Minneapolis, where they're saying they can't dispatch police. They don't have enough police officers to dispatch them to the most serious crimes. They have no time to enforce speed limits. I'm sure the city is realizing a commensurate loss of revenue from tickets, and they want to make that up. Yeah. And so let's automate it.
It's crazy. And then coupled with that, even small things like, I had read a story a couple months ago about them reducing the number of drive-throughs or eliminating drive-throughs in Minneapolis.
They have passed, there are no new drive-throughs to be allowed in the city of Minneapolis. And just recently they announced there were 2 Burger Kings because of a franchisee going bankrupt have been closed for a year. Mm-hmm. They now have new owners and are trying to reopen. But because they've been closed for a year, the drive-thrus, which were constructed in the 1990s, are not to be allowed on 2 existing Burger King buildings that had been in operation for 20, 30 years.
Right.
So they want to inconvenience the motorists. They want, like I said, their goal is to have over a third less vehicle miles traveled in the city. They are also doing that engineeringly. You have been noticing that the number of travel lanes on Minneapolis arterial streets, as well as Richfield arterial streets, have been declining. They've been taking an existing 4-lane road. They have been reducing it to 3 or 3 lanes, let's say, if it's a one-way street, or 2 lanes if it's a 2-lane street, with turn lanes and bike lanes.
Bike lanes, yes.
They are further reducing. They're saying, well, we have bike lanes now on our highest volume roadways, so we need to protect the bicyclists. So they are installing bollards. These are those plastic posts that are every few yards, and they physically separate the bike lane from the vehicle lane. In theory, that works very well to protect the less armored bike rider from a vehicle, but it is also absolutely terrible for plowing snow. It makes the current inefficient snow plowing regime in Minneapolis even worse, because a standard snow plow cannot plow the bike lanes. They need a skid loader in order to take the snow out of a bike lane. Right. Rather than the normal plow truck, and then they're left with a ridge along the bollards, which, if they have time, they will use a skid loader to reduce those. So they are reducing. They are putting the roads on a road diet. They are reducing the number of lanes on these arterial, the more highly driven roadways. Even though Minneapolis or Ridgefield is a grid system, and you could build a very safe bikeway on a low-volume parallel route, 1 block away, parallel route, just bringing them maybe at the major intersections to a stoplight where you can have a controlled crossing, which would be much safer for a bicyclist. No, it is not important that the bicyclists win. But they must make cars lose in order for them to get more capacity.
That's what it seems, because in any one of these solutions, it seems like there's at least some kind of happy medium to accommodate people who want to ride their bikes to work while still allowing for car usage. It seems like there are probably solutions out there that can do both.
There are.
Better.
And this 4 to 3 lane conversion, where you have you used to have two through lanes, probably no shoulders on an existing roadway, and now you're converting it to 1 travel lane in each direction with bike lanes on the outside and a center turn lane. At low to moderate volume arterials, that actually works quite well, and it is a good transportation engineering solution. Because when you have a lot of left turners, when you have the old 4-lane, you'd have a person stopped waiting for a gap to make a left turn lane. That lane was now no longer providing through capacity, and they're narrow enough that the people on the right lane are slowing down. So you're actually, with a center turn lane, those people can get off the road. The people in the driving lane feel safe to continue driving at 30 miles an hour and will continue to go. That works quite well up to 12,000, possibly even up to 15,000 vehicles a day. But we have some of our arterials that go up to 15, 20,000.
Yeah.
That number, that break point, I'm going to call it 15,000 vehicles a day, was something that the engineers would fight for, to say, yes, it is a good thing to do a 4 to 3 lane conversion for these lower volume roads, but we're going to hold firm on these higher volume roads.
Yeah.
If you take a look at 66th Street in Richfield, you will see that from Nicollet East, that project converted that to a 3 lane section.
Sure.
But it maintained the 4 lane section west of Nicollet because that's much higher volume.
It needed it, yes.
That was fought by the then mayor of Richfield, Debbie Gotel. She wanted a 3 lane section all the way to Edina.
Oh, yes, yes.
Hennepin County at that time said, no, we need to have 4 lane, and that was their road, and they held out. Well, now Debbie Gotel is a Hennepin County commissioner. There have been some staff changes, and now
She's not gotten less ideological, I've heard.
No, so. But I think if the 66th Street project was starting today, and knowing the people in Hennepin County Public Works as I do, we'd have a 3 lane section all the way to Edina.
Really?
Yes.
It doesn't
and because that the philosophy is changing and becoming much more radicalized at the city and the county level, as it has been radicalized at the Met Council for several decades, who have been resisting adding capacity to the existing freeway system in the metro area, and have almost had to be forced into accepting additional lanes. They have a policy as it must be a managed lane, like our min-pass lanes.
Sure.
And we've had a couple up on 494 in Maple Grove and on 694 up in that Shoreview, between E and W, that actually an additional general purpose lane was put in. Those were originally planned as what's called a price dynamic shoulder. You can run on the shoulder if you pay for it like you do a min-pass lane.
Yep.
Well, the Federal Highway Administration at that time looked at it and found out that for a couple $1 million more, you can turn that shoulder into a travel lane. And so they said, we're not going to approve a price dynamic shoulder. We will only approve a general purpose lane. That's how those 2 projects got built in this era.
And it was like, I'm sure it was like pulling teeth locally, right?
Absolutely. It was, I knew the FHWA administrator involved, and he wasn't going to be bullied. He did not back down. He's also has moved on and is no longer there. So we will see what happens next time.
Now, speaking of radical policies, the radical shift, the ideological element of all of this, because we don't talk about that enough. Transportation is a practical thing, but we don't talk about the ideological force behind it. There is a project that actually goes beyond this 2040 project, and it's the Zero project. Am I saying that right?
I think it's zero. Yeah, zero emissions. They are trying again. They are, and it's not just transportation. They want to replace our dependence on natural gas and coal-derived electricity with all renewables. And at least at the present time, they do not consider nuclear or hydroelectric as renewable.
Funny how nuclear in particular, we don't talk about that.
They want to have all electric vehicles that typically will recharge in your garage overnight when the wind is less and there is no sun. But when you have coal or nuclear, they run all the time. They're considered electrical generating base load, and that base load generally produces more electricity than you need overnight, which makes it perfect for recharging electric vehicles or making some kind of a storage battery. And in some cases, it's pumping water up high in a reservoir so it can come back down and generate hydroelectric power. But if they get rid of base load, all you have is renewables. And in those snowstorms we had to kick off the season, it took weeks for those solar panels to become uncovered. And we're finding problems that our wind generators are not lasting as long as projected and have to be recycled and replaced. And so while renewable energy is a good thing, total reliance on it is bad. They are also, as part of their of another zero plan, is they are, and it's a laudable goal, it is building on the states towards zero death, reducing the amount of, to reduce to zero the amount of traffic fatalities.
Sure.
And that's a good thing, and it has been steadily being reduced over time, and so reducing it to zero is a good thing. But when you implement the lower speed limits, when you implement traffic enforcement, when you reduce the main roadways and force pedestrians and bikes onto those main roadways, that is counterintuitive to towards zero death. And I think they will, when they are trying to encourage bikes on our high volume roadways rather than get them off and have them in a separate facility on a lower volume roadway, they are trying to harm cars more than they are trying to go towards zero deaths.
And I think that's probably key, and what I want the audience to take away from all of this is not that these are practical ideas, but these are ideologically motivated ideas intended to punish, not intended to improve life or make things more valuable for citizens. It is funny, the unintended consequences of this type of legislation. With the last 2 minutes, Frank, that we have on the show today, you're running for 63B. Tell us about why you're running for House, what you're passionate about, what you're bringing to the campaign, things of that nature.
I'm running because we need a conservative voice in the elections. I mean, Minneapolis, Richfield, starting to be Bloomington is becoming deep blue. Everything inside the Beltway, and maybe a little on the outside of the Beltway as well. I worked 34 years for the Minnesota Department of Transportation, a lot in the environmental area. So my passions are transportation and the environment. But I also, as well as that, I was an area manager for a little over 4 years, and I developed highway projects. And I decided to develop them with a frugal mindset rather than just build the best thing you can possibly do. In this area, we're all familiar with the Crosstown Commons project. I was responsible for a project called Unweave the Weave, which is 35E and 694 up in Vadnais Heights and Little Canada. Functionally, it's the exact same project as Crosstown Commons, and I built it for a third the cost.
Wow.
And so what I'm trying to get, I worked 34 years. I know government has been failing. We have been MNsure, MNLARS, the Department of Human Services fiascos that are going on. I worked in government. I know how I can make government work, and I want to bring that knowledge of how to streamline government. When the 35W bridge collapsed, my team got the environmental documents and clearances to rebuild that bridge in 9 days.
So it can be efficient.
It can be efficient. I don't think you can do that on a regular basis, but you can do it way better than the 30 years it took us to build the St. Croix River crossing.
Very good. Frank Pafko, thank you for joining the Republican Roundtable.
Thank you, Max.
This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm your host, Max Reimer. Until next time.